Sit back and enjoy an hour of fascinating facts you didn't know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started.
The famous mushrooms that Mario eats are based on a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. People who have eaten them in real life claim that they caused a sensation of feeling larger than normal. This red mushroom with white spots is one of the most recognizable in the world and frequently appears in illustrations and stories. However, it is also toxic and can cause hallucinations, nausea, and disorientation if consumed. There is no red light at approximately 33 feet of depth underwater. This makes blood appear green in color. Red light is the first to be absorbed by water, which is why warm colors disappear quickly while blue and green tones penetrate more deeply. For this reason, divers and underwater photographers use artificial lights or special filters to recover the real colors that the human eye stops perceiving at certain depths. It takes 1.5 hours to make a boiled ostrich egg, in case you ever want to cook one. An ostrich egg can weigh around approximately 3.3 pounds and is roughly equivalent to 2 dozen chicken eggs. Because of its size and its extremely thick shell, it requires much more cooking time. In addition, its shell is so hard that many times a small drill or similar tools are needed to open it without breaking it unevenly. Bananas produce antimatter at the rate of 1 positron every 75 minutes. This happens because they contain small amounts of the radioactive isotope potassium-40, which, when it decays, can emit positrons. Despite how striking the fact sounds, the amount is so tiny that it represents no risk. Between 70,000 and 150,000 saffron flowers are needed to obtain approximately 2.2 pounds of pure saffron. Alexander the Great washed his hair with saffron to keep it shiny and orange. Each flower produces only 3 small red stigmas that must be collected by hand, which explains why this spice is one of the most expensive in the world. Mr. Potato Head toys from 1952 to 1964 did not include a body. You had to provide your own potato. The toy included only pieces such as eyes, nose, mouth, and hats that were stuck directly into a real potato. Over time, a plastic body was added because the potatoes would rot and also due to new safety regulations for children's toys. There are 4,800 species of frogs in the world, but only one makes the sound croak. It is a species known for producing the classic sound that in many languages is represented as croak, while most frogs emit very different calls that can sound like whistles, buzzing, or chirping. Each species has its own call to attract a mate or mark territory. The human body has approximately 37 trillion cells. Each one is microscopic, but it contains DNA with enough genetic information to fill around 1,000 books of 600 pages if it were written in detail. Together, the DNA from all the cells in the body stretched out would reach astronomical distances, showing how incredibly compact genetic information is stored. When anesthesia was invented in the 1840s, many people criticized it. They considered it an unnecessary luxury. How brave. Some doctors and religious leaders even believed that pain during surgery was natural or morally correct. Over time, successful operations without suffering demonstrated its enormous value, and anesthesia became a standard practice. The man who invented the revolving door hated opening doors chivalrously for women. His name was Theophilus Van Cannel, an American inventor who patented the mechanism in 1888. Besides avoiding that social gesture that made him uncomfortable, his design also helped control air currents and maintain the temperature inside buildings more effectively. Uranium is 40 times more common than silver and 500 times more common than gold. Although it is usually associated with rare and dangerous materials, it is actually relatively abundant in the Earth's crust. It is found in small concentrations in rocks, soils, and even in seawater. Graphene, the strongest material in the world, is 1 million times thinner than paper, but 200 times stronger than iron. It is made of a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal structure. Since its discovery in 2004, it has been studied for applications in electronics, batteries, flexible screens, and ultralight materials. In 2002, artists turned telephone booths in Osaka, Japan into aquariums. Each booth was filled with water, fish, and decorations, transforming them into small artistic installations. The project sought to give new life to urban objects that were becoming obsolete with the popularization of mobile phones. In 1900, all the mathematical knowledge in the world could be written in only 80 books. Today, it would fill more than 100,000. Since then, the number of mathematical papers and theories has grown explosively in universities and scientific journals. Today, there are enormous academic databases dedicated exclusively to cataloging new proofs, formulas, and entire branches of mathematics. The Sega Dreamcast was the first console to implement online play through a telephone line. The system was called SegaNet. The Dreamcast was released in 1999. It included an integrated modem that allowed players to connect to the internet to compete or cooperate with other people. Titles like Phantasy Star Online helped popularize this early form of online play on consoles. Helium is a non-renewable resource. At some point, it will run out. This gas is mainly formed by the radioactive decay of elements inside the Earth and is extracted along with natural gas. Because it is extremely light, when it is released into the atmosphere, it slowly escapes into space, which means it cannot be recovered. Until the 1960s, the only method to know if a woman was pregnant consisted of injecting the woman's urine into an African frog. If she was pregnant, the frog began to ovulate within 12 hours. Thanks, technology. This method worked because the pregnancy hormone triggers that reaction in the species Xenopus laevis. Trinity College at the University of Cambridge has more Nobel Prize winners than the entire country of Italy. Founded in the 16th century by King Henry VIII, the college has been home to historical figures such as Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, and Bertrand Russell. Its scientific and academic tradition made it one of the most influential intellectual centers in Europe. The PlayStation was originally planned as an add-on accessory for the Super Nintendo that included a compact disc reader, but it was ultimately decided to make it a separate console. The disagreement between Sony and Nintendo led to the joint project being canceled, and Sony continued development on its own. The result was the first PlayStation, released in 1994, which would end up changing the video game industry. Scientists created a synthetic version of marijuana called dimethylheptylpyran that, when smoked, produces effects that last for 2 full days. This compound belongs to a family of synthetic cannabinoids developed in laboratories to study how these substances interact with the brain and the nervous system. Some of these molecules are much more potent and longer-lasting than natural THC. More than 80% of the world's population consumes caffeine in tea, coffee, and sodas daily. This substance acts as a stimulant of the central nervous system and can help reduce the feeling of tiredness. That is why it has become one of the most widely consumed psychoactive compounds on the planet. Durham University in Great Britain offers a Harry Potter course that includes the topic Gryffindor and Slytherin, Prejudice and Intolerance in the Classroom. The course analyzes the books of the saga as a way of studying social themes such as discrimination, identity, and the construction of stereotypes. It also compares these elements with historical conflicts and contemporary debates about diversity and inequality. The white towers that appear when you turn on the PlayStation 2 vary depending on the number and size of the games saved on the memory card inserted in the console. Each tower represents a save file, and its height changes according to the amount of stored data. It was a very original visual way of showing the contents of the memory. More chimpanzees, gorillas, and bonobos are eaten by people each year than there are in zoos around the world. In several regions of Central Africa, there is an illegal market for wild animal meat known as bushmeat. This trade represents one of the greatest threats to these species, which already face habitat loss and poaching. Actors who portrayed James Bond are forbidden from wearing tuxedos in all the movies they make after having played the famous agent. The idea seeks to prevent the public from associating that type of clothing too strongly with other characters. The black tuxedo became one of the most iconic images of the agent since the earliest films. Clint Eastwood is a certified pilot. Sometimes he arrives at film studios by helicopter to avoid traffic. The actor and director has been an aviation enthusiast for decades and has flown different types of aircraft. He also holds a license to fly fixed-wing airplanes, something he has mentioned in several interviews. The damsel in distress that Mario rescues in the original Donkey Kong game is named Pauline. In the Japanese version, she is simply called Lady. Over time, the character disappeared from the series for several years, but she returned decades later in modern games like Super Mario Odyssey, where she appears as the mayor of New Donk City. In the 19th century, sausages were sold under the name mystery bags. Today, they are still that, but now with another name. The nickname came from the fact that people often did not know exactly which parts of the animal were used to make them. Even so, sausages became one of the most popular street foods in Europe and America. Signals that impressed astronomers for 17 years, which they believed were extraterrestrial, were actually interference from the observatory microwave oven. Every time someone opened the microwave before it finished running, the device emitted a signal that confused the telescope instruments. There are around 1,200 species of bats in the world, and none of them are blind. In fact, most have good vision in addition to using echolocation to navigate in the dark. Bats represent nearly 1/5 of all mammal species on the planet and play a key role in pollination and insect control. Due to the ban on Japanese imports to Korea after the Second World War, the Nintendo 64 was distributed in that country by Hyundai and was called Comboy 64. For several years, Nintendo used Hyundai as a local partner to sell its consoles in South Korea under different names, a strategy necessary to comply with the trade restrictions that existed at the time. There is a bar in New York that operates like the stock market every night. The price of drinks rises or falls according to their supply and demand. When many people order the same drink, its price increases. And when almost nobody buys it, the price drops, imitating the behavior of the stock market. The Central Intelligence Agency reads more than 5 million tweets a day. Part of its work consists of analyzing public information on the internet to detect trends, events, and possible threats. This type of social media monitoring has become a common tool for modern intelligence agencies. Emma Watson said that filming the long-awaited scene where she kisses Rupert Grint in Harry Potter was a horrible experience because they consider each other like siblings. Friend zone. Both actors grew up together for more than a decade filming the saga, so they described the scene as uncomfortable and strange, even though fans had been waiting for it for years. The game Doom was the most installed program in 1995, surpassing even the Windows 95 operating system. Its shareware distribution model allowed millions of people to copy and share it easily, which helped the game spread through universities, offices, and personal computers around the world. When Einstein published the theory of relativity, the newspaper New York Times sent the correspondent who covered golf to interview him. At that time, many newspapers still did not have journalists specialized in science, so they assigned any available reporter. Over time, the complexity of scientific discoveries led to the creation of sections dedicated exclusively to science. The muscles that close a crocodile's jaw have the force equivalent to a truck falling from a cliff, but the muscles that open it are so weak that the mouth of a crocodile can be kept closed with a common elastic band. For that reason, some zookeepers can hold its snout shut with tape or with their hands, although doing so is still extremely dangerous. Only 2% of women describe themselves as beautiful. This figure comes from an international survey conducted in 2004 that explored perceptions of female beauty in different countries. The study showed that many women tend to judge themselves harshly, something that has been linked to cultural pressure and beauty standards promoted by the media. The first copies of Resident Evil Revelations for 3DS had a spelling error on the side of the game case. The title said Revelatance. The error appeared in the first physical copies distributed by Capcom, which turned them into curious collector pieces. In later versions of the game, and in new editions of the cartridge, the name was already corrected. 1 kilogram of coal produces approximately 3.6 kilowatt-hours of heat, while 1 pound of uranium-235 can generate approximately 10.9 million kilowatt-hours of heat. Wow! This enormous difference exists because nuclear energy comes from reactions in the nucleus of atoms, which release far greater amounts of energy than chemical reactions, such as combustion. The word school comes from ancient Greek and means free time. I think the meaning got lost over the years. It comes from the Greek word skole, which originally referred to time dedicated to rest, conversation, and reflection. Over time, that period of leisure became associated with study and philosophy, especially in the academies of ancient Greece. Colonel Sanders used to make surprise visits to KFC restaurants, and if he did not like the food, he would throw it on the floor and insult the employees. After selling his company, Sanders continued traveling across the United States as an ambassador for the brand. He was known for being extremely demanding about the original recipe and the quality of the chicken served in the restaurants. Guitar hero Aerosmith was not the first game where the American band appeared. In 1994, they starred in a spaceship game called Revolution X, where you had to rescue the musicians in a futuristic dystopia. The game was developed by Midway and originally appeared in arcade machines. players used weapons that fired compact discs to fight against a regime that had banned music. Nintendo had to spend more than $80 million to provide protective gloves to players who injured their hands playing the extreme minigames of the original Mario Party. Some games required rapidly spinning the control stick with the palm of the hand, which caused blisters and injuries in many players, especially in the United States. The original Xbox was going to be called DirectXbox because of its use of Microsoft's DirectX technology, but later they realized it sounded very silly and simply named it Xbox. The name originated as an internal abbreviation among the developers, but it ended up being liked so much within the company that it eventually became the official name of the console. There was going to be a sequel to the movie Gladiator, written by Nick Cave, in which Maximus would reincarnate in Rome in the Second World War, the Vietnam War, and the Pentagon. Unfortunately, we could not enjoy that cinematic jewel. The script was commissioned by the studio at the beginning of the 2000 decade, but the idea turned out to be too strange, and the project was ultimately never produced. If a vampire fed once a day and turned their victims into vampires who also fed once a day, the entire world population would become vampires in just 1 month. This happens because the number of vampires would double every day, creating extremely rapid exponential growth. At that rate, within a few weeks the number would even exceed the current world population. A female ferret can die if it goes a year without mating. This happens because females enter a prolonged heat and remain in that state until reproduction occurs. If the heat lasts too long, high hormone levels can cause severe anemia, which is why in captivity it is controlled through sterilization or breeding. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, had the idea of creating the pocket monsters after collecting caterpillars and observing how they turned into cocoons and butterflies. When he was a child, he liked collecting insects in the fields near his home in Japan. That hobby inspired him years later to imagine creatures that players could capture, trade, and train. In 1999, a 4-year-old girl turned yellow after drinking too much orange soda. The case was reported by doctors who explained that excess drinks with colorings and beta-carotene can cause a condition called carotenemia. This makes the skin acquire a yellowish or orange tone, although it is generally not dangerous and disappears after changing the diet. The International Space Station costs more than 30 times its weight in gold. Its construction involved the cooperation of several space agencies and required dozens of launches over many years. It is one of the most complex and expensive structures ever built by humanity. Adidas cancels any kind of sponsorship with athletes if they find out they have anything to do with the Church of Scientology. The company has had strict internal policies regarding associations that could affect its public image. In some cases, it has been reported that the brand avoids collaborating with figures linked to controversial organizations in order to protect its global reputation. If you save the game during the fight against the boss, The End, in Metal Gear Solid 3, and return to the game 1 week later in real lifetime, the enemy will already have died of natural causes, and Snake will be able to continue normally. This character is an extremely elderly sniper, and the game takes into account the real passage of time on the console. When you return days later, a scene appears confirming that he died of old age. Russians do not have a single word for blue, only 2 different words that mean light blue and dark blue. In Russian, the colors goluboy and sinye are distinguished and considered separate basic colors. Some linguistic studies suggest that this difference makes Russian speakers identify variations of blue more quickly. The application Send Me to Heaven makes you throw your phone as high as you can. The creator of this application said that he made it with the purpose of destroying as many iPhones as possible, but it was banned in the App Store. They ruined the fun. The program measured the height reached by the phone using internal sensors before it fell back down. Life has existed on the planet Earth for 80% of the time since it formed, and has been present practically since the moment the temperature stabilized. The oldest fossil evidence of microorganisms is more than 3,500,000,000 years old, which suggests that life appeared relatively quickly after the surface of the planet cooled enough. There is a supercomputer that belonged to the United States Air Force, made from 1,760 PlayStation 3 consoles connected together. The system was used for research tasks such as satellite image processing and complex data analysis, taking advantage of the powerful cell processor of the console. Just like humans, British cows make moo sounds with different accents depending on their region. Some researchers and farmers have observed that the sound can vary slightly depending on the environment and the group of animals they grow up with. It is a curious example of how even animals can develop regional vocal variations. The actress Carey Mulligan and the singer Marcus Mumford were childhood friends but lost contact. Each found fame on their own, and they met again as adults by chance. And now they are married. In fact, when they resumed contact, they began writing letters to each other, something uncommon today. Human saliva contains a painkiller called opioorphin that is 6 times more powerful than morphine. This molecule was identified by researchers in the 21st century and works by inhibiting the breakdown of natural substances that reduce pain in the body. Although it is present in very small quantities, its discovery has sparked interest in developing new painkillers inspired by natural compounds. The school in the game Silent Hill 1 is based on the school from the movie Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger. The building used as a reference was the elementary school that appears in that 1990 movie. The developers took its structure and adapted it to create a darker and more disturbing version within the game. The Sun takes 220 million years to orbit the galaxy, a journey it has completed only 20 times so far. This complete trip around the center of the Milky Way is called a galactic year. During the entire history of Earth, since it formed more than 4,500,000,000 years ago, the solar system has completed only a few of these orbits. There are 6 vehicles and approximately 55 short tons of trash on the moon, left by the Apollo missions. Dirty. Among those objects are lunar modules, tools, cameras, life support backpacks, and even bags with human waste. The astronauts left them there to reduce weight and be able to bring lunar rock samples back to Earth. Jeff Daniels was paid only $50,000 for his role in Dumb and Dumber, while Jim Carrey was paid $7 million. The producers initially did not want Daniels because he was known for dramatic roles, but Carrey insisted that he was perfect for the character. Over time, the film became a cult comedy and one of the biggest successes of the 1990s. Recently, in an interview, Shigeru Miyamoto admitted that he really likes Disney and that Link is inspired by Peter Pan. That is where the idea that the Kokiri never age came from. Just like the character from the story of Neverland, Link is portrayed as an adventurous boy dressed in green who lives in a forest and embarks on heroic journeys, an aesthetic that helped define the fantastical tone of the series, The Legend of Zelda. Metrophobia is the fear of poetry. Although it may seem curious, some people experience anxiety when facing poetic texts, especially when they must analyze them or read them in public. The term combines the Greek word for measure or verse with phobia, and it is often mentioned humorously among literature students. Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo mean capital in their respective languages. Beijing means northern capital in Chinese, Tokyo means eastern capital in Japanese, and Seoul comes from an ancient Korean word that simply means capital or main city, reflecting their historical role as political centers. A farmer in China bought and raised 2 puppies. Worried because they were killing and eating his chickens, he investigated and realized they were bears. They turned out to be Asian black bears, a protected species in the country. He had bought them thinking they were guard dogs, but when they grew and their behavior became more wild, forest authorities intervened and moved the animals to a conservation center. According to the instruction manual of Super Mario Bros., when the Koopas invaded the Mushroom Kingdom, they turned all the people into stone blocks. This explains why Mario can break some blocks during the game. According to the manual, many of those blocks are actually transformed inhabitants of the kingdom, a curious detail that is not mentioned directly within the game. A woman named Julia Butterfly lived 738 days in a tree approximately 164 feet tall and about 1,500 years old to prevent it from being cut down. The tree, a giant redwood she named Luna, was in a forest in California threatened by logging. Her protest attracted international attention, and eventually an agreement was reached to protect the tree. Fungi are more closely related and more similar to humans than to plants. At a biological level, they belong to a different kingdom and share certain cellular and metabolic characteristics with animals. For example, they obtain energy from organic matter instead of producing it through photosynthesis. China banned time travel on television because authorities say it is a sign of disrespect toward history. Officials considered that many series altered historical events in fantastical ways or portrayed real figures in a frivolous manner. At the beginning of the 2010s, regulations were issued to limit this type of storyline on state television. The popularly horrible game E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600 sold more units than Space Invaders, the most popular game on that console. E.T. sold 1.5 million, and Space Invaders only 1 million. The game was developed in just a few weeks, and its commercial failure led to thousands of unsold cartridges being buried in a landfill in New Mexico. In the time of the Roman Empire, salt was worth its weight in gold, and soldiers were sometimes paid with salt. That is where the word salary comes from. Salt was an essential resource for preserving food and for trade, which is why it had great economic value. Many ancient trade routes emerged precisely to transport this mineral. The creators of the site The Pirate Bay once tried to buy their own island to create a country where copyright laws would not exist. The idea was to establish a kind of digital micronation where they could host servers without legal restrictions related to file distribution. They even discussed proposals to install independent data centers and communication systems, although the project never went beyond the idea stage. The names Toyota and Honda derive from Japanese words used to classify different types of rice fields. Honda can be interpreted as original rice field, while Toyota emerged as an adaptation of the surname Toyota, also associated with agricultural land. Both names reflect family and cultural roots that existed long before the companies became giants of the automotive industry. In the classic Nintendo game Punch-Out!, the Russian fighter Soda Popinski was originally called Vodka Drunkinsky, but the name was changed to avoid controversy. The change happened when the game was adapted for Nintendo home consoles, since the original name made a direct reference to alcohol and to stereotypes about Russians. It is believed that there are 100,000 mountains under the sea. Only around 1,000 have been recorded. These formations are known as seamounts, and many rise thousands of meters from the ocean floor. Some even form islands when their summit emerges above the surface of the water. A newborn giant panda weighs the same as a teacup. At birth, it measures only a few inches and is completely pink, blind, and without the characteristic black and white fur. During the first weeks, it depends entirely on its mother to survive. Russians held so many wild parties when the Second World War ended that all the vodka in the city ran out. After the victory over Germany in 1945, there were massive celebrations in several Soviet cities. Some historical accounts mention that alcohol reserves were quickly depleted because of the scale of the celebrations. It was planned that Bill Clinton, the former president of the United States, would provide the voice of President John Eden in Fallout 3, but they were unable to secure him. In the end, the role was performed by the actor Malcolm McDowell, known for his participation in numerous films and series. His voice ended up giving the character a solemn and authoritative tone that fit very well with the atmosphere of the game. There is a chili pepper grown in Japan called shishito, where 1 out of every 10 is very spicy, and there is no way to know which one. Most of these peppers are mild and slightly sweet, but occasionally one develops a much higher level of heat. Because of that, eating them often becomes a kind of culinary roulette. A tablet with a full memory weighs a fraction of a billionth more than a new one. This happens because storing information involves organizing electrons inside the memory circuits. Although the increase in mass is extremely small and impossible to notice in everyday life, it demonstrates that physical information also has a measurable weight. In the first month of its life, a silkworm increases its weight 10,000 times compared to its birth weight. During that time, it consumes enormous amounts of mulberry leaves, its main food. This accelerated growth is one of the reasons why silkworm farming has been so efficient for producing thread for thousands of years. The Super Game Boy, the accessory for playing Game Boy titles on the Super Nintendo, contained all the Game Boy hardware except for the screen and buttons. This was because the Super Nintendo was not powerful enough to emulate the games on its own. In reality, the cartridge functioned as a complete Game Boy console inside the accessory, while the Super Nintendo only handled displaying the image on the television and reading the controls. If you insert a disc from the first Xbox into a PlayStation 2, you can see an animated logo before it announces that it is not compatible. The console tries to read the disc as if it were a video DVD, and for a few seconds, an animation of the Xbox logo appears. After that, the system shows a message indicating that the format of the disc cannot be played. The philosopher of ancient Greece, Chrysippus of Soli, died from laughing too much at a joke he invented. According to ancient accounts, he saw a donkey eating figs, and ordered that wine be given to it to accompany them. The scene seemed so funny to him that he began laughing uncontrollably, and according to tradition, that laughter ended up causing his death. When the Pokemon Paris evolves into Parasect, it is actually being taken over by the mushrooms growing on its back, which control it and leave it like a zombie. That is why the absence of pupils. There are species of fungi in real life that do this to insects. The actress Stephanie Beatriz caused her characteristic eyebrow scar when she tripped over a Lego when she was 10 years old. The fall caused a cut that left the permanent mark that today is part of her appearance. Beatriz is known for portraying Rosa Diaz in the series Brooklyn Nine-Nine. In Australia, you can buy kangaroo meat in the supermarket. It is also present on restaurant menus. It is a healthier alternative to beef or lamb since it contains only 2% fat. In addition, it is rich in protein and iron, and its consumption is also promoted because kangaroos are very abundant in the country. The gold dissolved in all the oceans of the world has an estimated value of $475 trillion. However, the metal is so dispersed that extracting it would be practically impossible with current technology. On average, there are only a few parts per billion of gold in seawater. Level 5 of World 5 in Kirby's Dream Land is a naked woman if you look at it from a general perspective. The shape can be seen when observing the complete world map, where the arrangement of the islands and paths creates a silhouette that many players interpreted that way. It is one of those curious details that was probably a coincidence of the design. The animal rights group PETA claims that cows can suffer humiliation if people laugh at them. The organization has argued that social animals can perceive negative human reactions as signals of threat or stress. Although the concept of humiliation is scientifically debated, there is evidence that human treatment influences the well-being of cattle. It takes 10 times more energy to heat water than to heat steel. This happens because water has a very high heat capacity, which means it can absorb large amounts of heat before increasing its temperature. For that reason, water is frequently used to regulate temperature in industrial systems and in the climate of the planet. The amount of water on Earth is constant and continuously recycled over time. That means that the water you drink today could have passed through a dinosaur and come out as dinosaur urine. The water cycle causes the liquid to evaporate, condense, and fall again as rain over millions of years. Loch Ness is deep and long enough to contain the entire world population 10 times. Very tightly packed, but we would fit. This Scottish lake reaches more than approximately 656 feet in depth and contains more fresh water than all the lakes and rivers in England and Wales combined, which explains why its enormous volume has fueled stories and legends for decades about the famous Loch Ness Monster. When Space Invaders was released in arcades in Japan, it was so popular that it caused a shortage of 100 yen coins throughout the country. Players formed long lines to use the machines, and many venues had to install more cabinets to meet the enormous demand the game created. A motorcycle that was dragged out to sea during the Japan tsunami of 2011 was found on a coast in Canada in 2012. The vehicle appeared inside a metal container that had crossed the Pacific Ocean with debris from the disaster. After identifying the Japanese owner, Canadian authorities managed to contact him and tell him about the surprising discovery. In London, there is a cereal cafe where you can eat hundreds of cereals from all parts of the world. The place became popular for offering curious combinations with different types of milk, toppings, and sweets, turning a simple breakfast into a rather peculiar gastronomic experience. The Chupa Chups logo was designed by Salvador Dali. The famous Spanish surrealist artist created it in 1969, at the request of the founder of the brand, Enrique Bernat. Dali drew the daisy shape in a single session and suggested placing the logo on the top of the candy so it would always be visible. The Sega Genesis had the same Motorola processor as the first Apple Macintosh computer. Both used the Motorola 68000 processor, although running at different speeds. Thanks to this chip, which was relatively powerful for its time, the Genesis could handle fast graphics and more complex games than many other consoles of its generation. Natalie Portman did not attend the premiere of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace because she had to study for her high school final exams. At that time, the actress was still a student at a secondary school in New York and decided to prioritize her studies. Years later, she continued her academic education and graduated in psychology from Harvard University. If one tree were planted for every Coca-Cola sold, we could reforest the entire planet in just 3 years. The company sells billions of drinks each year in more than 200 countries, which gives an idea of the enormous scale of production and consumption of this brand worldwide. Human touch can detect something as small as approximately 0.5 millionths of an inch, so do not worry. Neuroscience studies have shown that the fingertips are extremely sensitive to microscopic irregularities on surfaces. Under controlled conditions, people can perceive incredibly small differences when sliding a finger, demonstrating the extraordinary precision of the human nervous system. Star Ocean, Second Evolution, has 100 different endings. It holds the record for being the game with the most possible endings. These endings change depending on the relationships between the characters, the decisions made during the story, and who ends up traveling together at the end of the adventure, which encourages many players to complete the game several times. A guy named Eric Simons secretly lived in the headquarters of America Online for 2 months, eating for free, using the gym and showers, and sleeping in conference rooms while working on his own company. He had been accepted into an incubation program that was later canceled, but he decided to stay anyway. For weeks, nobody suspected anything because the building had thousands of employees. The concept of rap battles has existed since the 5th century, when poets held events where they insulted each other in verse. The Norse god Loki is known for having insulted other gods in verse form. In Norse mythology, there is a story called Lokasena, where Loki mocks and accuses several gods during a banquet, something very similar to a verbal duel. There is an altar in Bangkok, Thailand, dedicated to a beggar. One day, a man went to pray there and later won the lottery. As a thank you to the beggar, he sent many dancers to the altar, which became a tradition. Now everyone brings sensual dancers to that place to attract good fortune. Many claim that the pilots in the Star Fox series are not wearing silver boots as we might think. In reality, they all have to amputate their legs and use robotic legs, so the brain does not lose blood and they do not faint from the intense G-forces they are subjected to. A single zinc mine in Namibia uses 1/5 of the entire electricity demand of the country. It is the Rosh Pina mine, one of the most important mining operations in southern Africa. The extraction, crushing, and processing of the ore require enormous amounts of energy. Because of this very high consumption, mining has become one of the sectors that most influences the national electrical infrastructure. Super Mario Bros. Was the first video game to have movies. In 1986, a Japanese animated film was released, and in 1993, another with live-action actors that, if it were not for the name, nobody would have known what the hell was going on there. The live-action version was heavily criticized for its strange story and its dark style, very different from the colorful world of the game. A 5-year-old boy in India fell asleep on a train and ended up lost in Calcutta. 25 years later, he was finally able to find the way back to his home thanks to Google Maps. The boy was named Saru Brierley and spent his childhood without knowing exactly where he came from. Using memories from his childhood and exploring satellite images for years, he managed to identify his town and finally reunite with his biological mother. His story inspired the movie Lion. In 2008, a woman who had been missing for 42 years was found dead while watching television. Because she had died many years earlier, her apartment remained intact as it had been at that time, like a time capsule. The case occurred in London with Joyce Vincent, and in the apartment, there were still unopened Christmas presents and the television turned on. A common ballpoint pen can write 45,000 words before running out. The ink usually lasts long enough to draw several miles of continuous line, depending on the model. This type of pen uses a small metal ball at the tip that distributes the ink evenly as it moves over the paper. Pirates almost never looted gold, silver, and jewels. What they looked for were traded goods such as fabrics, animal skins, spices, sugar, dyes, tobacco, cocoa, cotton, and wood. These products were much more common on merchant ships and could be easily sold in ports or colonial markets, which made them a more consistent source of profit than legendary treasures. The Reznor enemies in Super Mario World are named after Trent Reznor, the vocalist of Nine Inch Nails. The Koopa Kids also have names inspired by famous musicians. For example, Ludwig von Koopa is inspired by Ludwig von Beethoven, and Iggy Koopa references Iggy Pop. Nintendo used these musical references as small cultural nods within the game. Scorpion venom is the most expensive liquid in the world, $38 million per gallon. This is because obtaining small quantities requires extracting the venom manually from each scorpion. It is used in medical and pharmaceutical research, especially to study treatments for cancer and neurological diseases. In Finland, traffic fines are calculated based on a person's income. This causes some millionaires in that country to pay up to 10,000 euros for running a red light. The system is called the day fine and seeks to ensure that the penalty has a similar impact on people with different economic levels. More pure gold can be recovered from 1 short ton of computers than from approximately 18.7 short tons of raw gold ore. This is because many electronic devices contain small amounts of gold in their circuits and connectors, since it is an excellent conductor and does not oxidize. For that reason, electronic waste recycling has become an important industry for recovering valuable metals. The appearance of the character Eli Vance in Half-Life 2 is based on Larry Herbert, a homeless man the developers found on the street. According to members of the Valve team, they saw him near their offices and were impressed by his appearance. They asked for permission to photograph him and use his face as a reference when creating the character model. As part of an experiment, 12 people pretended to have mild auditory hallucinations in order to be admitted to psychiatric hospitals. Once admitted, they began behaving normally, but 11 were incorrectly diagnosed with schizophrenia. The only people who realized they were healthy were the other patients. 10% of people do not like cilantro because when they eat it, it tastes like soap to them. This is due to genetic variations that cause certain people to perceive some compounds of cilantro differently, producing a sensation similar to the taste of soap. Research has pointed to variants in genes related to smell that cause certain aldehydes present in the plant to be unpleasant for some people. Elizabeth, the widow of Sir Walter Raleigh, kept the decapitated head of her husband with her in a velvet bag for 29 years. Raleigh was executed in 1618 by order of King James I. According to historical accounts, his wife kept the embalmed head as a memento until her own death. The largest map in all video games belongs to the game Elder Scrolls II: Daggerfall. It is 4,000 times larger than the map of Skyrim. The world of the game covers a huge portion of the fictional region of High Rock and Hammerfell and was procedurally generated. This allowed the creation of thousands of cities, towns, and dungeons that players could explore freely. Eating spaghetti in Italy with anything other than a fork is considered very bad manners. In Italian tradition, spoons are not used to roll long pasta, although in some restaurants for tourists they are offered. The correct way is to twist the spaghetti only with the fork against the plate. A white lion and a female white tiger had 4 cubs in 2013. They are the rarest big cats in the world: white lions, white ligers, and white tyans. These combinations are extremely unusual and usually occur only in captivity due to the mixing of species. The Xbox was the first system with support for high-definition televisions. Microsoft's console, released in 2001, could display some games in high-definition resolutions, such as 720p and 1080i, if the appropriate video cable was used. This was something ahead of its time, when most televisions were still standard definition. A statue of Jesus in Ohio, United States, was destroyed in 2010 when it was struck by lightning that caused it to catch fire and collapse. The sculpture was made mainly of flammable materials over a metal structure, which allowed the fire to spread quickly. The event was widely discussed in the media and on social networks. IMAX projectors weigh the same as a hippopotamus. Their bulbs cost $5 million each and are bright enough to be seen from the International Space Station. These machines use enormous optical systems to project extremely sharp images onto giant screens, which allows films to be shown with a level of detail far superior to that of traditional movie theaters. There are 5 categories of hurricanes. The slowest has the same wind speed as the maximum speed of a cheetah, while the fastest beats the most powerful roller coaster in the world with approximately 149 miles per hour. This classification is known as the Saffir-Simpson scale and measures the intensity of hurricanes according to the sustained speed of their winds and the potential damage they can cause. When Zelda Ocarina of Time was re-released for the 3DS, Nintendo deliberately did not fix some errors, so the experience would be as similar as possible to the original version. Some small glitches and curious behaviors were kept because they were already part of the memory and experience of players who knew the game from the Nintendo 64 version. On an island in Indonesia, if a baby dies before its teeth grow in, it is placed inside the trunk of a tree. The hole is sealed, and the tree begins to heal. It is believed that the baby is absorbed. This funeral tradition is practiced among the Toraja and symbolizes that the child returns to nature. Every 3 seconds, the sun emits more neutrinos than the number of atoms in all the humans who have lived in all of history. These neutrinos are produced during nuclear reactions in the core of the sun and pass through matter almost without interacting with it. Billions pass through the body of every person each second without us noticing. Mila Jovovich and Luc Besson created the divine language for the movie The Fifth Element. By the time the production of the film ended, the two already spoke it fluently. The language was designed with basic grammatical rules and its own vocabulary so that it would sound coherent within the science fiction story. The difference between terror and horror is that terror occurs in anticipation of the experience of horror. Horror is when the pretty girl runs to escape the killer and save her life. In narrative terms, terror builds tension and expectation, while horror appears when the thing that causes fear is finally shown or confronted. Nintendo had to distribute Super Nintendo consoles at night in Japan as a security measure so they would not be stolen by the Yakuza, the criminal organization of that country. The enormous demand for the console caused long lines in stores, so Nintendo decided to send shipments at dawn to avoid robberies and security problems. Humans reached the moon before rolling suitcases were invented. The Apollo 11 mission occurred in 1969, while modern wheeled suitcases began to become popular in airports many years later, at the end of the 1970s. Hundreds of years ago, people went to sleep early. They woke up for about an hour in the middle of the night to do various activities and then returned to bed for a second period of sleep. Historians have found references to this first and second sleep in diaries, literature, and European medical records from before artificial lighting. Antarctica is a continent completely surrounded by oceans, while the Arctic Ocean is an ocean completely surrounded by continents. This geographic difference explains why the Arctic has floating ice over the sea, while Antarctica has an enormous continental mass covered by a layer of ice. People who speak more than 2 languages tend to change personality when they change language. Psychological studies have shown that language can influence the way someone expresses themselves, their sense of humor, or even the way they describe emotions. This happens because each language is associated with different cultural contexts and experiences. Charles Martinet, the actor who provides Mario's voice, also voices the dragon Paarthurnax in Skyrim. Oh, mamma mia! Martinet has worked for decades portraying several characters in the Mario universe, including Luigi, Wario, and Waluigi, which made him one of the most recognizable voices in video games. Patrick Stewart had already lost all his hair by the age of 18 and thought that no woman would ever be interested in him. Over time, his appearance became one of his most recognizable characteristics as an actor. Decades later, he achieved worldwide fame portraying Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek. The handshake originally existed to confirm that the person you were seeing did not have a weapon. By extending the right hand, which normally held swords or daggers, both people demonstrated that they came in peace. Over time, the gesture became a universal form of greeting. 8 out of 10 people bite the heads off gummy bears first when they eat them. This small habit has been observed in surveys and informal experiments about eating behavior. Some theories suggest that people start with the head because it is the part we identify as the character, while others believe it is simply the easiest place to start biting. It is believed that Ditto is a failed attempt to clone Mew. This is because the 2 Pokemon have the same statistics, the same colors in their shiny version, and can use the ability to transform. In addition, both appear in the same areas within the first games, and Ditto can breed with almost any Pokemon, which has fueled this theory among fans for years. Andy Warhol always wore green underwear. The artist had many quirks related to his appearance and his daily routine. He was also known for keeping boxes full of everyday objects that he called time capsules, where he stored everything from letters and receipts to small memories from his daily life. A new species of owl is discovered approximately every 10 years. Many of these species are found in tropical regions or in little explored mountainous areas. Sometimes they are identified by differences in their song, their plumage, or through genetic studies that reveal that they were actually a different species. 3 years of intensive education are required to become a police officer in Norway. The training takes place at a university, and each graduate receives a degree in police studies. During that time, students receive training in law, psychology, ethics, conflict resolution, and proportional use of force, reflecting the country's focus on prevention and community policing. The games Pokemon Gold and Silver were going to be the last in the popular franchise. During their development for Game Boy, The Game Freak team even included almost the entire Kanto region in addition to the new Johto region, practically doubling the size of the game. Their enormous commercial success and the response from fans convinced Nintendo to continue the series. There is a frog in Australia that fills itself with water like a balloon. Aboriginal people learned that if you gently squeeze one of these, you can drink its water. Ew! This species is known as the water-holding frog, and it can store liquid in its body during droughts. In desert environments, it buries itself underground and can survive long periods waiting for rain. Greyhounds have a field of vision of 270 degrees. They can see objects that are behind them. This is due to the lateral position of their eyes, which allows them to detect movement very easily. This characteristic helps them react quickly while running, something important for one of the fastest dog breeds. There are approximately 6,900 languages, but only 20 of them are used by more than half of the world's population. Languages such as Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, English, Hindi, and Arabic concentrate enormous numbers of speakers. Many of the other languages on the planet have very small communities, and several hundred are in danger of disappearing during this century. The concept of Sonic emerged because the creator of the series, Yuji Naka, was trying to finish the first level of Super Mario Bros. As fast as possible. That idea of speed inspired Sega to create a character whose gameplay would be based on running through levels at very high speed. The final design of the Blue Hedgehog debuted in 1991 and quickly became Sega's main mascot. Final Fantasy is called that because it was supposed to be the last game of the company Square, after having gone through difficult times with bad games like Rad Racer or World Runner 3D. The game ended up being an enormous success when it was released in 1987, and not only saved the company, but also gave rise to one of the most famous role-playing series in video games. Before the Renaissance, 3/4 of all the books in the world were written in Chinese. For centuries, China had an enormous tradition of writing, printing, and preserving texts. The early invention of paper and woodblock printing techniques allowed many more books to be produced than in other regions of the world. It is impossible to press a button on a controller more than 16 times in 1 second. Seriously, try it. If someone tells you they can do more, do not believe them. In informal tests and manual skill competitions, most people fall well below that number. Surpassing it consistently without mechanical help is extremely difficult, which is why many suspicious records usually involve modified controllers or turbo functions. The first home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, released in 1972, contained only 40 transistors and had no microprocessor. In comparison, the processor of the Nintendo 64 has 4.6 million transistors. 95% of all the information in the world is still stored on paper. Most of it corresponds to administrative documents, legal archives, historical records, and printed material. Although digital storage has grown enormously in recent decades, huge amounts of information still remain physically archived in libraries, offices, and government archives. 69% of people in the back of an airplane survive accidents, while only 49% of those in the front survive. Analyses of airplane accidents have suggested that areas closer to the tail of the aircraft may offer higher chances of survival in certain types of impact. An adult produces enough hydrogen in their urine each year to power a car for approximately 1,678 miles. This is because urine contains urea, a compound that can break down to release hydrogen. Some researchers have studied ways to take advantage of this process to generate fuel in a more sustainable way. According to a Nintendo guide from the early 90s, Yoshi's full name is T. Yoshisaur Munchakoopas. This fact appeared in official promotional material and manuals related to Yoshi Safari. Although it is rarely mentioned within the games, this name became a popular curiosity among fans of the Mario series. Leonardo da Vinci was the first person to observe the curvature of the spine. Until that moment, everyone believed it was straight. Through his anatomical studies and dissections, he drew the spine with its natural curves and described how they help maintain balance and distribute the weight of the human body. His notebooks also show vertebrae drawn with great precision, anticipating many anatomical studies by centuries. As soon as tiger sharks grow their teeth, they begin attacking and eating each other inside their mother's womb. This phenomenon is known as intrauterine cannibalism and also occurs in other shark species. The strongest embryos devour the weaker ones, which means that only a few survive before birth. In Driver 3, there is a character wearing a Hawaiian shirt named Timmy Vermicelli, clearly a parody of the Grand Theft Auto Vice City character Tommy Vercetti. They gave him floaties as a mockery of the inability to swim of the Grand Theft Auto character. In the early games of that series, if the protagonist fell into the water, he died immediately. There is 150% more caffeine in chocolate milk than in Coca-Cola. This happens because cocoa contains small natural amounts of caffeine and theobromine. Although the difference exists, in both cases the amounts remain relatively low compared to a cup of coffee. Final Fantasy VII began its development as a Nintendo 64 game, but it was changed to the PlayStation due to the memory limitations of cartridges. The game, which occupied 3 PlayStation 1 discs, would have required 13 Nintendo 64 cartridges. Almost half of all babies in China are born by cesarean section. In some cities, the proportion has been even higher during certain years. Among the reasons mentioned are preventive medical decisions, preferences of some hospitals, and the possibility of scheduling the birth date, something sometimes related to cultural beliefs about lucky dates. The year after the United States Civil War ended, 20% of the budget of the state of Mississippi was spent on prosthetic limbs for wounded soldiers. Thousands of combatants returned with amputations after the fighting. State governments had to create special programs to manufacture and distribute prosthetics to veterans. Even though the works of Shakespeare contain more than 1 million words, only 14 words written by him by hand exist. 12 are his signatures, and the other 2 are by and I. Most of his works survived in printed copies or manuscripts written by other people, which is why authentic examples of his personal handwriting are extremely rare. The Disney movie Frozen caused an increase of 153% in searches for flights to Norway, and an increase of tourists in hotels of 37%. The aesthetic of the fictional kingdom of Arendelle is inspired by Norwegian landscapes and architecture, which sparked the interest of many fans to visit the country. In the world, 4,000 McDonald's hamburgers are eaten every minute, the same number that can be made from one average cow. The chain sells tens of millions of hamburgers every day in thousands of restaurants around the planet, which makes it one of the largest and most influential fast food companies in the world. The photo on the cover of the album Silver and Gold by Neil Young was taken with the Game Boy camera, an accessory that turns your Game Boy into a monochrome digital camera. This small device, released in the late 90s, also allowed users to edit the images and transfer them to the portable Game Boy printer. The former president of the United States, George W. Bush, named The Very Hungry Caterpillar as his favorite childhood book, but it was published when he was 23 years old, so it does not quite add up. The children's book was written by Eric Carle and published in 1969. It became one of the best-selling illustrated books in the world. It is still possible to distinguish between East Germany and West Germany from space. This is because different types of street lamps were used. After reunification, many areas of the former East kept lighting with different tones for years, creating a visible contrast in nighttime photographs taken by satellites. Tomb Raider Legend begins without an introduction scene because the developers forgot to make one. During development, it was decided to start the game directly with the action to maintain a faster pace, although many players thought it was a mistake or a missing scene. Crews on submarines do not use the 24-hour day measurement. On a submarine, a day lasts only 18 hours. The schedule is usually divided into cycles of 6 hours of work, 6 hours of rest, and 6 hours to sleep or perform other tasks. This system helps maintain constant shifts in an environment where there is no natural light. There are no moles in Ireland. The island was never reached by this species after the last glaciation, so the animal simply is not part of its native fauna. This contrasts with Great Britain, where moles are quite common in fields and gardens. Because Ireland became isolated from the continent before these animals spread, they never managed to colonize the island naturally. In 1917, John D. Rockefeller could have paid the entire public debt of the United States by himself. Today, the entire fortune of the richest man in the world would only cover 2 months of interest. At that time, the federal debt was relatively small compared with the modern economy, while Rockefeller accumulated an enormous fortune thanks to the oil empire of Standard Oil. Today, government debt figures are so massive that they far exceed any individual fortune. Assassin's Creed began development as a Prince of Persia game called Prince of Persia: Assassin, but they preferred to turn it into an original game. The developers wanted a protagonist who acted independently instead of protecting a prince, which led Ubisoft to create a new franchise set in historical conflicts. In the early stages of development of Half-Life 2, it was planned that there would be a friendly alien that would follow Gordon Freeman and eat the bodies of the enemies he killed. But it was abandoned because it would be complicated to program. Half-Life 3 confirmed. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, the trophy of Princess Daisy had a mysterious eye behind her head. This gave rise to all kinds of macabre theories. In reality, it is a small error in the three-dimensional model of the trophy, something many players discovered when observing the object from unusual angles.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss more interesting content. Leave your comments and click on any of these videos. See you next time.